Avatar The Last Airbender is good at a lot of things, but romance is not its strong point. Aang and Katara have never been that popular, Sokka and Yue are more of a meme than a ship.
That's rough, buddy.
Korra's love triangle was widely thought to be distracting, and Korra and Asami have really only been given the full space to develop in the comics after the show, which is why, looming over all of these is
Zutara.
And even though we didn't end up together, it'll never change the fact that you changed my life forever. Zutara Week 2013.
Zutara, the ship which, unlike Yue, refuses to die, bringing together the fiery and brooding Zuko and the caring and terry Katara. Zutara, by the way, is 5 times more popular on Tumblr than the canon ship, consistently 3 to 4 times more popular on Google Trends, and the only country in the world where Katang is more popular is Nigeria. Good for them, I suppose. None of this non-canonical nonsense there, but the hype for Zutara will not die. And we have to wonder if maybe, just maybe, don't shoot me, I'm just the messenger, if Zutara would have been better?
You inspire your men to study such foul smut, Commissar? You heretic!
On the face of it, it's very easy to see why people are drawn to Zutara. It's all fire and water, red and blue, opposites attract, the dark and brooding hero and the nurturing feminine heroine. And don't get me wrong, the fan art is gorgeous, like it feels right looking at it. But Zutara shippers will shoot you down if you say, oh, it's just wish fulfillment, it's just aesthetically pleasing. No, they will argue, it's because it is more meaningful than Katara and Aang. So, okay. Let's take it seriously. Let's investigate. And to do that, we really have to understand Katara and Zuko as individuals to get to why they might have been better as a couple. Part 1. Katara. The idea that Katara is better suited to Zuko is deeply rooted in her character arc. When we first meet her, she is the lone waterbending survivor of a genocide perpetuated by the Fire Nation, and only a survivor because her mother sacrificed her life to save her. With her father gone off to fight in the war, we very quickly come to understand Katara has had to mature not only far quicker than she should have ever had to, but far quicker than her brother Sokka, who cosplays as the man of the house while she's taken on real responsibility.
You're on your own!
That's her explosion at the start of the show, which triggers the iceberg. This childhood trauma has given her an unyielding hatred for the Fire Nation, and you know what? Fair enough. But the primary representative of the Fire Nation in her life and the story quickly becomes Zuko. In the second episode, he invades her home, demands Katara hand over Aang, only for Aang to sacrifice himself for her village, and she's thinking, oh great, more people sacrificing themselves for me. We see Katara looking on, tears in her eyes, and this isn't just her being afraid for a friend, but what must have felt like a repeat of the night her mother died. Not to mention, Zuko being the prince of the Fire Nation makes him, in her eyes, one and the same with the state apparatus which wiped out her people and killed her mother, and that unyielding hatred also manifests in an intensely emotional streak which pops up all throughout the story, and it's something that Katara is often mocked for. But she's got this sense of justice and empathy which often comes out in righteous anger throughout the series. But it also manifests in something else, in this intense feeling of loneliness. In one of the best scenes in the series, Sokka admits that he can't really remember his mother's face, that in her place he saw Katara's. Katara, on the other hand, has very concrete memories of her mother and carries that pain in a way Sokka has never had to, especially since she had to fill those shoes. It's lonely to be the adult where your friends and siblings get to be the children. Like The Runaway is an episode where everyone kind of craps on Katara for not being fun, but the episode isn't really about Toph versus Katara. That's a very surface level way of looking at it. It's more about how Katara has had to be the adult in the room for her whole life. She's had to manage the risk of being discovered. Over and over, she's had to take initiative and responsibility faster than everyone else. Everyone gets to have fun, but only because she doesn't. And I think this manifests in why some people prefer Zutara. Aang feels tangibly more childlike in his mannerisms, his humor, his arguable naivete for much of the series. There's a big maturity gap between these two, something which doesn't feel like so much of a problem with Katara and Zuko, even if the age difference between the two is identical. But it is more than that. Like, as the last waterbender of her tribe, Katara carries the weight of her culture's legacy on her shoulders. Her identity is wrapped up in her genetic capacity to carry on an important part of her culture. She's been raised to keep this part of herself, her power suppressed, with no access to training or waterbending masters, no knowledge of her culture. We also learned that each of the water tribes have their own distinct different waterbending styles and philosophies, and Katara has to carry all of that while being cut off from it for most of her life. It's no wonder that Katara steals that waterbending scroll in the first season. People simplify this episode to Katara just being jealous of Aang, being naturally good at her thing, and stealing the scroll to get the better of him. But the scroll also represents the first exposure she's had to her own culture. Of course she's fascinated. All of this meant that Katara had a childhood where being kind and nurturing was rewarded while expressing her power was frowned on. And if this sounds opposite to someone else, you're right, and we will get to that. Katara's character arc is primarily about reckoning with that past, connecting with her culture by realizing her abilities and processing her grief and loss of her childhood. We see that in the waterbending scroll, how she learns water healing with Zhong, and how she challenges Paku at the end of the season, especially because here, Katara is not just fighting for herself, but her culture. Like in the Southern Water Tribe, women are allowed to be soldiers, where in the North, they're only allowed to be healers. She wants to find her place in her culture. This journey with grief and rage and her ancestors is probably best explored though in The Puppet Master, where Katara meets Hama, another survivor of the Southern Water Tribe genocide, and a bloodbender who uses her waterbending to take revenge on the ordinary people of the Fire Nation. This episode is primarily posited as an exploration of the philosophical ethics of waterbending, as Katara learns to draw moisture from the air, from blood, from plants. But it's also a choice. How is she meant to channel her grief and rage over the loss of her people? Does she become like Hama and take vengeance, or does she find another way forward? She's always considered waterbending as this life-giving, healing power, but here she gets to see it in a new light as this darker, extractive power she now has. Does she risk using this dark, raw power? How does it change how she views herself? But this emotional journey we see her on is also explored through her relationship with Zuko, both as her antagonist and later ally. Zuko steals her necklace, the one memento she has connecting her to her mother and culture, and there are all these little details which to the Zutara eye probably looks like they're hinting at something further down the line.
I'll save you from the pirates.
All of this coming together in the now iconic catacomb scene in the climax of Season 2, which Zutara shippers will never let you forget.
You have no idea what this war has put me through. Me personally. The Fire Nation took my mother away from me.
I'm sorry. That's something we have in common.
And her journey involves meeting people like Haru and Jet to help her feel less alone in her grief, who all lost parents to the Fire Nation in some way, and each of them also help Katara grapple with how she's meant to manage her own feelings. Katara is the heart of the group. This is like the trope of the emotional and moral one who always stands up for what's right, who helps you when you're down, who offers hope and pushes people to be better. Imprisoned is an underrated Katara-centric episode where she literally gets herself arrested and taken to Guantanamo Bay just so she could literally lead a revolution with the power of hope. Her role in the story is to see the best in people all the time, to help them to be better. And this moment in the catacombs is kind of the ultimate test of that part of her character, because it's finally forcing her to empathize with the ultimate symbol of that pain that she has, right? She fully admits that when she imagines the face of the enemy, she sees Zuko's. But here, she starts to see herself in him. And his ability to understand her grief and pain leads them into the Southern Raiders, where Katara goes on to face her mother's killer Yon-Ra with Zuko. This episode is fundamentally about whether she can find a healthier way to process her trauma, and she does, sort of. She may not forgive Yon-Ra or anything, but she does realize that she's channeled her trauma and pain into blind rage at Zuko, and so forgives him. In so many ways, Katara's journey with loss and trauma is directly connected to her ability to connect with Zuko, and Zutara shippers really love this idea. In the same way we all kind of love when two characters who might hate each other honestly find something of themselves in the other person. Zuko moves from the object of Katara's inner turmoil to being something more. If empathizing with Zuko and then forgiving him were both fundamental parts of her arc, symbols of how far she's come, then we have to ask, and Zutara shippers will ask, well, what might happen next? What's the natural conclusion? Is it maybe, just maybe, love? So, that's Katara. Let's talk about Zuko.
I was not meant to be sitting here. This was not meant to be happening. Right now, I was meant to be telling you about a sponsor, because a while ago, a pretty popular writing software reached out to me and said, hey, we want to sponsor some videos, which I thought was great because they're a great fit for the videos and a really important source of income for me. But then, after a while, it became clear to me that the writing software has features which are sort of pushing people to use AI to generate some of their text, to suggest rewrites and changes, to lean on that. It was only a small part of the product, but that sort of made me uncomfortable. So I reached out to them and I asked them how the AI was trained. I wanted to talk about that, what their plans were for it in the future. Some answers were good, some less good, but I still had my doubts. So I asked you guys, I put it to a poll, and the majority of you felt that this crossed a line. There are nuances as to where AI can fit into the creative process and the industry, but they aren't nuances I felt I could meaningfully and ethically explore while taking that amount of money from them. So I pulled the sponsor, and that was a significant financial hit for me, but it was a decision I felt I needed to make. Plus, I realized if you want educational writing tools anyway, then I have something far better to give you, my on-writing and world-building books, which take all of the educational writing and world-building discussions we've had and put them into these easier-to-read and reference books with far more detail and depth than I could ever fit on YouTube. You know, here on YouTube I'm limited by the algorithm and thumbnails and video structure, and I've got none of that in here. They're just far better, and they've already sold about 100,000 copies already, which just astounds me every single time I say that, but each of these covers completely different topics, so you can pick which one suits you best, but I say gets all three. But if you're wanting fiction, instead, then you can get a catalog for the End of Humanity, which is packed full of sci-fi and fantasy stories, which are super meaningful to me and apparently really meaningful to the people who've read them as well. You know, thank you so much if you've read a review. There's stories about a girl who becomes a god. There's a family who lives with death. There's stories about the stars going out. And all of these are created completely without AI and purely with 100% human expression. Because I realized that I can't fully throw myself behind that writing software, but I can fully throw myself behind these. And it's pretty amazing that I get to, promote my video with my own stuff anyway. But if that's not enough, you know how it seems like the ending of Game of Thrones feels like it was written by AI? Well, I've got a video about that, sort of, about whether the ending to Game of Thrones is going to be the real ending in the books, or which parts of it are and which parts of it aren't, and which parts completely baffle me. You can go listen to that over on my Patreon right now. And there's also another video exclusive for patrons on Andor as well. All of these are a great way to support my work. So if you want to help me keep making videos, if you want you to be the sponsor of all of this, then I say pick one of these. If you want fiction, get a catalog for the End of Humanity. If you want to learn more, get my on-writing and world-building books. And if you want to hear me talk about Game of Thrones and Andor, then go join the Patreon and listen to those exclusives. Thank you so much. Back to the video.
Part 2. Zuko. When we first meet our toasty boy, he is a teenager consumed by rage and anger and self-righteousness and envy and feelings of inadequacy and resentment, and of course, no honor.
Honor, honor, my honor, my honor.
And we very quickly come to understand where this has come from. He was banished by the Father Lord after protesting sending new recruits to die, and then refusing to fight his father in the Agni Kai, and instead begging forgiveness. He was raised in an environment where restraint and empathy and kindness and love were punished as weakness, while strength and action and taking up his place in the culture were rewarded. His father permanently scars him as a reminder of that weakness. There's an interesting panel in the comics set after the series where Zuko asks his father for advice. He asks Ozai what the right thing for the Fire Lord to do is, and Ozai basically says, hey, whatever the Fire Lord does is right by nature because it is the Fire Lord doing it.
Not to worry, I have a permit.
This just says I can do what I want.
It's not the best comic, but it does illuminate something interesting, because, in other words, it's not just that Ozai wanted to punish Zuko for his empathy, but for Zuko backing down and reconsidering anything that he might have wanted to do at all, instead of doubling down, being even more aggressive, asserting himself at any cost. The idea that he might think he was wrong and reconsider a decision is the same as weakness. If all of this sounds diametrically opposite to Katara, you are starting to get the point. It is all about symmetry. Zuko, we come to realize, has built up this facade of bravado and aggression to try and be more like his father. His dark and brooding aura isn't just a symptom of his misery, but him actively trying to suppress the lighter and kinder and happier parts of his personality. And a character in this sort of position often needs external forces to help break down that hard exterior and deconstruct it. And this is mostly Uncle Iroh, right? Pushing Zuko to ask himself, who is he outside of the identity his father gave him?
Who are you? And what do you want?
But guess who else is a positive force for change and optimism in other people's lives, who can see through the dark and brooding exterior to perceive just maybe who really lies beneath, who helps people feel good about themselves when they feel inadequate, who is the first person to offer hand when they've been kicked down? It's, of course, Ty Lee! But also Katara, right? Right at the start, even when they barely knew each other, the audience could see these character dynamics forming, that they kind of just made sense. They felt good. It felt like Katara was going to fill Zuko's hole. In that iconic catacomb scene where she suggests she could heal his scar to take away the symbol of his shame to free him to become someone else, we get it. At the most critical point of his arc, who is there to try and push Zuko in just the right direction but Katara? And the audience just froths over that. Zuko's arc is about learning to separate his identity from his father's approval and the Fire Nation, to reckon with others he and his people have hurt, and to find healthier ways of dealing with his trauma. We get glimpses of Zuko's sincerity and kindness scattered throughout the first season, in The Storm and the Siege in the North, when he offers to save Zhao, but he's mostly unapologetic. He sees himself as someone who's had to struggle to fight for what he has alone. Unlike Aang or Azula, they were born lucky, he was lucky to be born. It's only when he's declared a traitor at the start of season 2 that he really starts to consider, hey, maybe my father doesn't love me. And who else is he going to be outside of being the banished prince? He starts to deconstruct this idea that the Fire Nation is spreading their prosperity to the world, as he has to live and coexist with the very people his country has hurt. The girl with the scarred leg, the villagers, Jet, and eventually Katara, who he has hurt himself. But an equally important part of this journey is how it forces him to be vulnerable. We see in The Blue Spirit, this moment where he realizes that Aang has saved him, he lashes out. Not just to try and capture him, but because he's allergic to seeming weak. The moment he begins to let himself be vulnerable with anyone, including with Uncle Iroh, he leaves on his own, unwilling to accept that path forward. He can't let anyone see him that way. He has a similar moment after the fight with Azula where Iroh goes down and Katara offers to help. He lashes out again. He doesn't want to accept help because he thinks it makes him look weak. But Season 2 drags Zuko down to his lowest point, forces him to be dependent on others for housing and food and help, and in all of this, at his lowest point, he is open to the greatest change. He starts to empathize again with the vulnerability of others and sees the true reality of the Fire Nation's war. Zuko Alone is an interesting episode because Zuko turns up to this village where nobody knows who he is. He's not the banished prince. He's not the prince with the scar. Everyone has scars here. He's just some random refugee. He gets to toy with the idea of being someone who isn't Zuko, who doesn't have to be strong all the time. There's no risk to being vulnerable when people don't know who he is, and he allows himself to help others, to see that it's okay when they're in a vulnerable position too. We also finally come to see how he lost his mother, creating yet another parallel with Katara. We see him as someone deprived of motherly love, and guess who regularly takes on the role of camp mom and is kind and healing and understanding? We also see in Zuko Alone how Zuko reimagines himself as his mother's son.
Son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai.
He said his mother's name first, reimagining himself through the lens of this caring woman, that he has that in him too. And we see that conflict kind of go on further in Season 3, where we learn about the Avatar and the Fire Lord, that he has these two sides to him, through his mother and his father, and just needs the right person to bring it all out. It's like he knows there is something missing in him and he needs someone to fill it. I wonder who. And all of this leads him to the catacombs, where he finds Katara, where he feels weak and defeated and vulnerable, and he finally seems open to accepting help from who else but Katara. The two bond, and it seems at the moment that this might be the final push he needs to change permanently, but no, sorry. He betrays them, makes things worse, and falls back into old ways. All of this pretty much makes Katara the final boss of Zuko's redemption.
It's a white flag, and you may as well start waving it right now,
The only
Leslie.
thing I won't be waving is your decapitated head on a stick in front of your weeping mother.
Good Lord.
Earning her trust is about as symbolically significant as it can possibly get. Katara being someone from a culture that the Fire Nation has brutalized, being someone that Zuko himself has personally victimized multiple times, and this all leads us to the Southern Raiders, which we've already covered from Katara's perspective, but from Zuko's, this whole episode setup is a radical act of empathy, right? Like at the start of the episode, Katara is wrapped up in her pain and grief and guilt, all things that Zuko knows incredibly well, and Aang tries to press Katara to just forgive Yonra, to move on, but Zuko says, hey, no, she needs to face him. She needs to face him the way that I faced my father. It's not that she necessarily needs to take revenge, but she needs to find a way to process that anger and those memories, and that can mean at least facing the person. So much of Zuko's journey has been about trying to find healthy ways to deal with his own problems, which really all built up to that moment with his father during the eclipse. And this is that moment for Katara, a moment only Zuko really seems to understand. Zuko's arc doesn't peak when he faces Ozai, it peaks when he's able to use his newfound perspective to help Katara in a way nobody else has yet been able to. Just as she sees herself in him, he sees himself in her. Symmetry. And all of this comes together when it's Katara and Zuko who go to fight Azula. Zuko even willingly sacrificing himself for her, and her being the only person in the world who could possibly heal him. The metaphors abound. When we think about writing romance and shipping characters together, we're often talking about how they complement each other's strengths and weaknesses, how they fill in the gaps in each other to find deeper meaning through each other, a two-way relationship of give and take. And for Zutara shippers, it's symmetry and parallels and intrigue galore. Where Katara is raised to suppress her power and always put others before herself, Zuko is raised to embrace power and view kindness as weakness. Where Katara needs someone to help her process her grief and trauma and anger more healthily, Zuko needs someone who can teach him to love by first loving him. We've got two characters who both struggle to channel their anger and trauma in healthy ways. If you want to get Freudian, we've got a sad boy who misses his mum and a motherly woman who just can't help mothering every sad boy she meets. Where Katara's arc is all about reconnecting with her culture, Zuko's is all about asking who he is outside of his. Katara's kindness and empathy tempers Zuko's anger, and Zuko's proactiveness inflames Katara's sense of righteousness. Zuko is literally scarred, Katara is the magical healer. Zuko starts his journey to become a better man by learning a waterbending technique and lightning redirection, but it's also him who helps her realize she shouldn't rely on bloodbending, a darker power. And most of all, both of their arcs fundamentally peak with how they relate to each other in the same episode. True love might just seem like the natural next step, a love which isn't just based on attraction or circumstance, but mutual respect and understanding. Not to mention the other parallels which just make it seem like they're destined for each other. Zuko becomes the blue spirit using a mask we now know comes from, guess what, a dark water tribe spirit, while Katara poses as the painted lady, a Fire Nation spirit. In both cases, Katara and Zuko use their spirit disguises to do something that they couldn't as their normal selves, almost yin-yang, like there's a bit of fire in Katara's water and a bit of water in Zuko's fire, something only satisfied in maybe finding each other? And something Zutara shippers have absolutely clung to, and I do not blame Zutara shippers for putting this yin-yang stuff in their art all the time because, like, it looks gorgeous. Not to mention, it shows up in the show. Fire and water are on opposite sides. And guess what? Opposites also mean that there's more conflict. And I think this is fundamentally why so many people are attracted to Zutara over Katang. It's just more exciting. People like conflict. They like enemies to lovers. There's only one bed, doomed love, forced proximity, the humble peasant girl, and the hot sexy prince, because they have this innate tension built into them. The scene in the catacombs is forced proximity. They're trapped down there. Hell, if they had to stay there for the night, I'd be expecting them to turn around and find an old bed waiting for them. But only one bed. The fact they hate each other only makes their eventual love a more dramatic and interesting swing for some people. If we compare this to Katara and Aang, the main tension is arguably much closer to the miscommunication trope, which, I get it, a lot of people are not fond of. I don't like it either. You've got Aang kissing Katara because he doesn't know how to communicate his feelings, and her not really knowing what to say. In the Cave of Two Lovers, we do get that forced proximity as well, but it's just not the same.
Oh,
Well, I didn't realize it was such a horrible option.
The tension in Zutara feels a lot more about them bonding over mutual struggles and interests than maybe it seems Katang is for a lot of people. And this is kind of the classic enemies to lovers versus friends to lovers debate you see a lot in fanfic communities all the time. Like Hermione from Harry Potter, aka Draco and Hermione, easily the most popular ship. Not canon, but mostly for the same reasons. It's conflict. Them bonding just has far more tension and intrigue than Hermione and Ron, who are always let's be honest, a little odd, even if Hermione doesn't really make sense. All of this is why in some ways, Zutara is very reminiscent of the classic love triangle. You've got the usually traditionally feminine, but still very strong female main character at the top, and a choice between the dark and brooding anti-hero and the goody two-shoes but safer and secure hero. The choice is between danger and risk, or security and ease. And guess what? In a lot of these stories, the female protagonist often ends up picking the anti-hero because we learned that what she really wants is someone who pushes her outside her comfort zone. That's increasingly more popular these days. The anti-hero might be more dangerous and darker, but it's only because of his darkness that he can truly understand the deeper and more fundamental parts of her personality, the darkness inside her, what she truly needs, in a way that the goody two-shoes is just incapable of understanding. And that is there in the Southern Raiders, at least on one interpretation. He gets that she needs to confront her mother's killer, and that means maybe exploring that darker side of herself, because we do get these glimpses of burgeoning rage, of a desire for vengeance to punish those who have wronged her. And then we've got Aang, the pacifist. Is he really going to understand her the way Zuko might? Zutara shippers will also point out to a whole other side of this argument, that Zuko's growth is at least in part about learning to love himself, love others, something Katara is basically built to do from the ground up. She's not the heart for nothing. And then there's May, Zuko's supposed girlfriend. And let's be honest, their relationship is usually depicted to some degree as at least mildly dysfunctional, even when they're happy.
I just asked if you were cold. I didn't ask for your whole life story.
May is overly disinterested and emotionally disconnected like a 2009 emo, which maybe initially drew them together when Zuko was also an emo, but that relationship falls apart when Zuko is clearly needing someone to unpack everything he has going on. I'd hardly say, quote, hating the world together is a good motto for a pre-marriage course, and in The Beach, Zuko explicitly criticizes May for bottling up her feelings, having no passion for anything, and that he likes when she expresses herself. And who does that sound like he's describing? Ty Lee, but also Katara. It's that, oh, he wants her and doesn't even realize it trope, which so many of these stories play with. If there's one thing Katara is, it's openly emotional. The I can fix him trope is popular for a reason, and as cool as
I love Zuko more than I fear you
was as a line, Zutara shippers would never let canon get in the way of a ship, because one reading of this is that May is just definitely not suited for him, and part of him learning to love and express himself honestly is finding someone who can support him in that. And is that May? Or is that going to be the girl who the first moment she got trauma bonded with him? Not to mention the whole point of this section of Zuko's narrative after Crossroads of Destiny, where he gets to come home, be the prince, play the part, regain his honor, be with May again, is that the story gives him what he thinks he wants and then allows him to see how hollow it is. And May is a part of that, almost as if the catacombs with Katara were a glimpse of the most meaningful thing he's been destined for this whole time. He rejects it before he finally comes back to what he needs most, or who he needs. All of this leads us to the argument that maybe there's a love triangle if you squint by the time of the Ember Island players. After all, Aang tries to hit on Katara, puzzled as to why they aren't together, and Katara says,
because we're in the middle of a war, and we have other things to worry about. This isn't the right time.
Except, is Katara lying here? I mean, there was a war on before as well. The only thing that's changed is Zuko. The Southern Raiders was just the episode before, where Katara was functionally choosing between Aang's way of doing things and Zuko's way of doing things, and she sort of picks Zuko. In a way, sort of. This at least paints the illusion of choice, and some people want to read this conflict as carrying through to this moment in the Ember Island players. And I mean, hell, the play even has their actor counterparts fall for each other, and the two of them kind of cringe and blush. Classic foreshadowing. Especially because, despite Mike and Brian, the creators of Avatar's insistence that Zutara was never on the cards, there is concrete evidence to suggest that Zutara was at once a possibility for canon. The Avatar extras, which are semi-canonical, twice refer to Zutara being on the table in the writer's room, and the extras were written by none other than Joshua Hamilton, who wrote, of all episodes, The Ember Island Players and The Cave of Two Lovers, as well as helping out with The Southern Raiders, The Beach, and Crossroads of Destiny, all of which form part of the supposed Zutara narrative. Writers like Aaron Haas and even people like M. Night Shyamalan, that they didn't decide on Katang that Katara and Aang were definitely going to get together until around season 3. Don't read into this too much, but there's actually an early draft of The Southern Raiders, one of the last episodes of the series, where the writers say, quote, Katara and Zuko are a more awesome pair, an Avatar-style Mr. and Mrs. Smith that would make Brian proud, working together with Zutara fueling synchronicity and cooperation. Like, they were definitely aware of it, and they describe them like a married couple. Obviously, it's not canon, but it lends credence to the idea that at one point it might have been considered for it, and therefore you can sort of interpret some of these moments through that lens as like potentially genuine affection. That until we got that confirmation, we just had kind of this Schrodinger's Zutara, and all of this can make Zutara feel like a natural conclusion, even if it wasn't canon. Obviously, it's not canon, but it does lend credence to the idea that these moments could be legitimately interpreted as having romantic undertones. The obviously most meaningful answer in Ship, especially because a lot of people argue Katang is supposedly one-sided, that Katara lacks agency. Aang wants her, but Katara's kinda like and then she kinda gives in and he kisses her without asking.
The 4 sweetest words in the English language. You wore me down.
The argument being Zutara isn't just more symbolically resonant, but would be a healthier relationship. A lot of people dismiss shipping culture as kind of childish wish fulfillment, or even worse, that it's a girls thing because only girls care about romance, and that somehow makes it like less worthy of being talked about. It's wrong and dismissive and elitist. It's true that a lot of Zutara, like many non-canonical ships, is reliant on over-interpreted metaphor, that it's not just Katara choosing how to deal with her grief on her own terms, but her choosing between Zuko and Aang romantically, that it's not just Katara doing what she always does and healing people wherever she can, but her being the healing force Zuko needs in his life, that Katara is the symbolic mother figure Zuko has been pining for. It's the yin-yang symbolism, the water and fire. It's interesting that in The Cave of Two Lovers, an episode supposedly about Katara and Aang's love, the myth of Omar and Shu more closely resembles Zuko and Katara than Aang and Katara, right down to the two meeting in a cave of green crystals, which is exactly what happens in the catacombs. And you might not like it, but if you actually look at the Omar and Shu myth in the Netflix series, it kind of hints that maybe they're leaning in Katara, as they made Omar and Shu red and blue. Because fundamentally, and I want you to think about this, take away the idea that it is romantic in the end and just look at the analysis that people in this community are doing. Basically, everything I said about what these two characters mean to each other is still true. If you look through how people talk about Zutara on Reddit or Tumblr or Archive of Our Own, it's full of people truly engaging with the text in a meaningful way, talking about themes and symbolism, often deeper than many people casually engaging with the story ever get to. Zutara hasn't just stuck around because, oh, Zuko is hot and Katara is a self-insert and people like a dark and edgy romance. It stuck around in part because these people really love the themes and messages of healing journeys and redemption and trauma and growth and agency and empowerment, and they feel that if those themes and messages are true and real, then Zutara is a more vivid expression of it than Katang. Shipping is an exercise in imaginative textual analysis. I don't think it's all that different to the video essays about rewriting the end of Game of Thrones, which were incredibly popular a few years back. Just like those videos, shipping often involves reimagining certain scenes or adding in wholly original ones. Like, take a look at this comic, which adds in a whole other scene between Zuko and Katara just after they face Yon-Ra, but before they return home. Zuko empathizes with Katara, draws a parallel between her letting go of the ice spikes and him not redirecting the lightning at his father. Both of them having this moment to turn their violence against their abusers, but choosing a better path. Or there's this other one, which extends the Ember Island players to see them both reckoning with how cheap the player made their moment in the catacombs seem. And this does get to the heart of something that I think Zutara shippers do understand, that even if Zutara was a possibility, there just wasn't enough time in the actual series for it to naturally develop. After all, Zuko really only shows up in the latter half of the 3rd season with space to bond with Katara, at which point she's really pissed off at him. But all this shipping culture, all this love for Zutara is fundamentally people engaging with the story meaningfully and trying to realize those themes in a personal way. It is so much more than wish fulfillment. They understand the story and themes and symbolism and love that and bring it to life in this truly beautiful way. And I'm not going to say that Zuko and Katara being the conventionally attractive characters when we were kids didn't play a role in all of this at all. It probably did. They are characters in part designed for us to see ourselves in. I am sorry if you grew up an Aang lover. I think you're the real ones. Let me know if you are down in the comments below. But one of the really great things about Aang is that he is not a conventional male protagonist, you know, in so many ways. He's pacifistic, emotionally open, not prone to hubris, and also, yeah, like less conventionally attractive. I do think it's worth asking whether romantic love is necessarily the most meaningful expression of a story's ideas. Why not friendship? Is Zuko and Katara's bond less meaningful just because it's canonically platonic? And like, no, all of this stuff is still true, of course not. But I think this kinda misses the point of shipping culture. People like love stories. Love is a big part of who we are, how we express ourselves, so it's going to be a big part of how we idealize the stories we tell as well. We get invested in the characters and the ideas they represent. We want the best for them. And when love is on the table, people will hope for that in different ways. Now, I do need to admit that I've never been that invested in many of the ships in Avatar or Legend of Korra. It's just not something that I have been drawn to the series through. But I will confess that Zutara does tickle the little writing side of my brain a little bit. Like, I get where it comes from, but we're kind of leaving a whole other side of this discussion out. You know, if we're going to take Zutara seriously, I think we should take Katang seriously. I think we shouldn't just write it off as less meaningful, which is what I think some people do. Which is why when I was making this video, I sat down and I was like, oh, I have to make a whole other video about Katang. And I did, and I have, and you can watch it right now. Shipping is fundamentally about their relationship with and love for the story. Because a lot of Zutara arguments all about how, you know, narratively compatible Katara and Zuko are, but I think this can lead people to weirdly leave someone pretty important out of this discussion. Which is why I decided I had to make a whole other video talking about Katang and whether that works and what people are missing, because I think people are missing things, and guess what? You can watch it right now. It's talking through like why people perceive Aang Katara as less deep and where that comes from and whether that's right and all the things we get wrong, because people do get a lot of stuff wrong. But also it's kind of about like shipping culture as a whole, like this cultural phenomenon which defines so many fandoms, something which I'm not necessarily a part of, but I find really fascinating. Stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.
This is Hampy. Oh, hi there. You're here for the secret ending to the video. Well, I spoke a lot about like the importance of human expression in art, how valuable that is for me. So I kind of want to like put my money where my mouth is a little bit and show you some of the incredible Zutara art that I've encountered across the research for this video. Because I came across a lot and I wanted to share it all, but I couldn't just like naturally, organically fit into the video. So I'm just going to show you now. I'm just going to tell you about it. I'm just going to show you it. And all of these artists are linked down below in the description. So if you want to go hire them, commission them, then you can, because I think they're all incredible. So the first piece is by Alethean over on Twitter, and you can kind of see, you know, Zuko and Katara leaning into each other, kissing passionately. This is a very common kind of like image in Zutara art. It's a very passionate, very physical love a lot of the way, where they're often leaning in to kiss, or they are kissing, their bodies wrapped, you know, more closely to each other. But I really loved this art in particular, because of the detailing on all the robes. You know, it's the sort of thing that you know that they wish they could have done in the series, but you know, the animation budget would never allow it. And I especially love like the little hint of fire in his hands and healing water in her hands. Again, it's that yin-yang sort of image, you know, that is so prevalent in a lot of this art. The other thing you'll notice, of course, is that they're very clearly adults. And this is something which is almost universally true of Zutara art, that they are very clearly adults being drawn as later in their life, which, you know, is I think an interesting kind of like idea of how people imagine that relationship. Katang does have a lot of the adult stuff as well, don't get me wrong. There's also, there's a lot more of an emphasis on like the family and stuff like that. But there's also a lot of them being a lot younger. The next piece is by Painted Fire Lady over on Tumblr. And this was interesting. This stood out to me because it reimagines the famous Pride and Prejudice scene, you know, the Jane Austen story, you know, with the hand clenching as Zuko and Katara sort of taking that original enemies to lovers. So it's not really enemies to lovers, but there's that conflict, and putting it in this context. You know, we're always using other stories to sort of kind of understand and internalize other new stories, you know. There's another example of that, actually, that I found by Kiwintara, which is a reference to Everything Everywhere All at Once. You've got this piece where Katara and Zuko are looking at each other. In another life, I would have really liked just doing laundry and taxes with you. This piece stood out to me because, as I said, a lot of the Zutara art is very it's very physical. There's a lot of like kissing, passion, that sort of thing, and this is very ordinary. You know, it's kind of hinting at the monotony of daily life, and I think the ordinariness of daily love is just so important in getting to the depth of any relationship. And so the pieces where they're just sort of like together and living together and being people really stood out to me. The next thing I want to talk about is the pins by R. Simon. They're just these beautiful little metal pins that I found. I wish I could get them. I thought they were incredible. I really, really love them. I think they're just kind of like great little symbolic encapsulations of Zutara. Now, the next person, this is Dim Parbit on Tumblr, and they've actually made a lot of Zutara art. I had to be really deliberate with which pieces I showed, and so I settled on this one. This is them basically encountering the Painted Lady and the Blue Spirit, you know, the sort of spiritual analogues for their characters, but those spirits are like sort of leaning into each other, sort of fighting, sort of loving. It's hard to say exactly, but it speaks to another element of a lot of the Zutara art, which is that it's very dramatic, it's very allegorical, it's very symbolic, it's very emblematic. Again, you've got that sort of yin-yang element coming into it, but there's sort of this mythic grandeur melodrama to a lot of the Zutara art that comes up a lot, and it's really beautiful in a lot of ways. You know, creating this sort of spiritual analog for their relationship, I think is really cool. But the next piece is arguably my favorite. This is by 19 Silver Mirrors over on Tumblr, and it's taken from the moment in the Southern Raiders. It's not necessarily Zutara in the way that we sort of imagine, but instead it's sort of speaking to this critical moment in their relationship. I absolutely just adore the colors on this piece. I love how much it shines out. It almost seems to glow, you know, and I think that's really, really beautiful. It sort of really struck me. It's like almost a watercolor in a sense, and you've got this intensity in there that I really love, especially because so much of the love between the two of them focuses on pain and scars and trauma and things like that. You're sort of seeing that come out here. The next piece is by Addict of Reading over on Tumblr, and I really love this piece because of how it speaks to what Katara and Zuko do for each other. Katara's sort of holding up this water shield. She is protective, she is a healer, and then he's sort of lighting the way. He's providing this fire. It's just a nice, simple expression of their relationship here. The next piece sort of comes back to the passion that I was speaking about at the start. It's by Arctic Fox. Arctic Fox did a lot of pieces, and I was sort of trying to figure out which piece to use. It just had, I don't know, it just sort of, it was a really nice one, and I liked it, and so I decided to include it, really. I love kind of the softness of the colors. It almost looks like it's like actual textured paint on like a canvas, and it's just got that like beautiful, it's more romantic than it is passionate, and I really like that. This is by Do0HWA on Tumblr. This one's interesting because it's sort of a modern day reimagining of Zuko and Katara's characters. This is something that I encountered a lot. Modern day reimaginings of the characters. This also applied to Katang, there's a lot of those as well. But sort of translating that into the modern scenario, I just felt was really interesting. If you like that sort of thing, then there's a lot out there for you to find. The last one I want to show you is by Neotia Orchids. This one is really interesting because you've got a red Katara and you've got a blue Zuko there. Obviously, this is sort of that yin-yang thing again, you know? He's got a bit of her and him, and she's got a bit of him and her. And it is really interesting because, of course, in the show, when Katara goes to the Fire Nation, when she dons the red outfit, that is when she really discovers who she is. You know, that's when she really comes into her own. And so it's almost like she could only fully achieve that when she managed to sort of like embrace a little bit of the fire. So there were so many pieces of art that I wish I could show you, but these are just a handful, you know, and links down below. I really love that. If you like human art, go check them out, go check me out, and I will see you guys in the future.